Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. I'm Maruf Raza. India lost more diplomatic ground in 2013 than it gained, largely due to a lack of political initiative and the necessary leadership from New Delhi, from losing leverage in Colombo to not backing a genuine ally in Dhaka. Dr. Manmohan Singh's government also seems to have lost the plot on the precarious US-India relationship. What must India therefore do to retrieve lost ground and pursue a predetermined and clearly perceived set of goals in foreign policy? And with me on the show is Dr. C. Rajamohan, Head of Strategic Studies at the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi and one of India's foremost foreign policy experts. Dr. Rajamohan will analyze foreign policy shortcomings of Dr. Manmohan Singh's government and will also give us an insight on the challenges that India's foreign policy will face in the year ahead. 2013 ended with a big blow to Indo-US relations as India's Deputy Consul General in New York, Devyani Khobragare, was arrested, handcuffed and humiliated by US officials on December 12th. New Delhi reciprocated by suspending privileges, immunities and courtesies extended to US diplomats in India. US Secretary of State John Kerry expressed regret but didn't apologize, and Washington said it will not withdraw the cases against Devyani. With neither governments ready to blink, Indo-US diplomatic relations remained at a crossroad. Also, the Obama administration's stunted vision and India's political paralysis have already put a nail in the 2008 Indo-US Civil Nuclear Agreement. The strategic relationship between New Delhi and Washington is not moving on the right path as the United States accuses India of not delivering on the nuclear liability issue. Even though the US has in the past rued missing out Indian Air Force's MMRCA contract for fighter jets, but New Delhi had made up with several lucrative arms deals for the US worth nearly $10 billion. Moreover, Washington is also keen to position India as a major counter to Chinese influence in Asia, as the US looks at India as a key element in its strategy of rebalancing forces in Asia. But the big question is, will India now buy into America's game plan? Despite much talk about an Indo-US strategic partnership, it appears that the US is essentially desirous of accessing India's defense market and to use India in its strategy to counter the Chinese shadow in Asia. Or is there more to an Indo-US relationship now?
Look, in my view, the defense is important, but it's certainly not the primary aspect of a relationship. The primary element must remain the economic one, and US remains our single largest trading partner. Unlike with China, where we have a huge trade deficit, we have a trade surplus with the United States, and most of our leading sectors require significant expansion and deepening of cooperation with the United States. As far as the security side is concerned, look, it's not that the US has a plot to put India against China. In fact, many in India doubt given the US interdependence with China, will it be able to actually confront Beijing? So I think it is not a question of seeing the relationship from a single prism, that we have a wide range of interests, there are many convergences, there are many ambiguities. The important thing is this is a critical relationship for both of us, and the challenge in 2014 is going to be how do we build on this relationship and overcome immediately the present crisis on the main issue.
Well, how can the US give India a greater sense of security vis-a-vis the Chinese when it has been reluctant to even stand up for an old ally like Japan against China, as opinion in Washington seems to be divided between how far it could lean towards Pakistan and still keep India humored? What are your views?
Look, in this world, everybody's on their own. When there are convergences, there are alliances, there are partnerships. When the conditions change, those could fall by the wayside. So I don't think anybody's asking India to put all its eggs in the American basket. The question is India prepared? Is the Indian defense establishment capable of doing the right things in order to take advantage of the existing opportunities in the US defense field? Now, US is not selling arms to China. It's willing to sell arms to India. Now, can we use that to expand and strengthen our national defense industrial base? So we take what we want. So it is not a question of others driving us. After all, don't forget, we are the 10th largest economy. We'll be the third largest in another 20 years. So I think we should think about these things in a more confident, self-confident way rather than imagining conspiracies from outside.
Sino-Indian relations dominated the news earlier on last year more than usual. The 3-week-long standoff between Indian Army soldiers and the Chinese PLA in Ladakh's Depsang Plains last year brought the boundary dispute between the two countries to the forefront. As India adopted a range of diplomatic efforts to deal with the new and more aggressive Chinese government to defuse the situation. Border dispute was orchestrated by Beijing a few weeks before the new Chinese Premier Li Keqiang's visit to India, his first international tour, as both countries resolved to take the robust trade ties to another level and breach the $100 billion mark by 2015. And while trade keeps the relations between India and China at a strategic level, there are big stumbling blocks that both countries need to resolve. The presence of the Dalai Lama and a large population of Tibetans in India continues to irk Beijing. But more so, China's diplomatic and military ties with Islamabad was a cause of concern to New Delhi, as was Beijing's continued support to Pakistan's civil and military nuclear programs and its considerable strategic investment inside Pakistan, like the Gwadar port near the Strait of Hormuz. Equally important was China's presence along the Karakoram highway north of Kashmir that kept policymakers on the alert in New Delhi. But it is Beijing's strategy of countering India with a string of pearls in the form of naval bases in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Myanmar, with the increase of China's shadow in Nepal and the Maldives, that keeps New Delhi most concerned. And even though External Affairs Minister Salman Khurshid's China visit was followed by the Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh's visit to Beijing last year, both intended to tone down tempers, but until India learns to counter an aggressive Beijing, China will continue to increase its footprint in the region. Should India continue to enhance trade ties with China when Beijing is not really moving forward on the border issue?
Absolutely. I think we have no option, to expand the engagement on the economic side. After all, China is the second largest economy in the world after the United States, is our largest trading partner in goods. I think the problem on the economic side is the trade deficit is too much in China's favor. We're not able to access Chinese markets for export of our high technology products. So therefore, we got to keep pressing Chinese on the economic issue for fair trade, for balanced trade. But at the same time, we can't link the boundary issue to the economic cooperation issue. And I think on the boundary, the problems are not on our side. China is not stopping us from building our roads. But the Defense Ministry must explain, why is it taking so long to build roads? After all, the BRO, the Border Roads Organization, is under the Defense Ministry. So I think the challenge for us is, look, Chinese power is growing. The capacity to operate on the border is growing. So therefore, our challenges are at home. Can we devote our resources? Can we be more focused in transforming our infrastructure on the border? If we are strong on the border, the Chinese will take that into account.
Well, in the light of India's strategic partnership with Japan and India's maritime interest in South and Southeast Asia, what should be the strategy that India should adopt in countering China's shadow in these two regions?
Look, I think in Southeast Asia, all the countries in the region, from Japan to Singapore, from Philippines to Myanmar, all of them are looking for options vis-a-vis China. It's not that they're going to fight the Chinese. Nobody wants to go into the embrace of one country. So there is room there for India's activism on the defense front. There again, I see the problem on our side. Our defense diplomacy has been weak. Our defense ministry is not geared to engage these countries, because while all of them are asking for more cooperation, we're unable to deliver. And I think there again, the problem is, dear Brutus, as they say, is in the South Bloc and not on the other side. And within the region, I think the challenge is even more tougher because whether it is Maldives or Nepal, whether it is Bangladesh or other places, the Chinese profile is going to continue to rise. And to cope with that, what we need is not to constantly worry about what the Chinese are doing, but what are we doing? Are we willing to do more with Sri Lanka? If the Prime Minister can't even go to for an international meeting there, then the problems are clearly is our ability to deal with the reality on the ground.
Welcome back. In 2013, New Delhi's handling of relations with Pakistan and almost all of India's immediate neighbors has left a lot to be desired. And Dr. C. Rajamohan from the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi and one of India's leading foreign policy experts continues to be with us on this show. If the tenor of the relationship between India and Pakistan in 2013 is anything to go by, there is little room for optimism as the Nawaz Sharif government now awaits the change of guard in New Delhi to take any major steps in bilateral relations, even as the DGMOs met recently to agree on the guidelines to avert further clashes and tensions along the line of control. If the tenor of the relationship between India and Pakistan in 2013 is anything to go by, there is little room for optimism, as Nawaz Sharif's government now awaits the change of guard in Delhi to take any major steps, even as the DGMOs met recently to agree on guidelines on averting clashes along the LOC, which was the scene of tense engagements earlier last year with two major attacks on Indian soldiers and their brutal killings across the line of control. Followed by Pakistani-based jihadi groups infiltrating and attacking Indian military positions near Jammu, all leading to New Delhi's alarm against Pakistan's intentions as intermittent firings and attacks along the LOC threaten the 10-year-long ceasefire, in addition to the killing of an Indian prisoner in a Pakistani jail. Nawaz Sharif's return as Prime Minister of Pakistan was initially viewed with some optimism on this side of the border, despite ongoing tensions. And even after Mr. Sharif attempted to internationalize the Kashmir issue, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh decided to meet Nawaz Sharif on the sidelines of the UN summit in the US, though without any significant outcome. The expectations of bilateral peace in New Delhi have been far from fulfilled, as Pakistan failed to move forward on the evidence provided by India on the 26/11 attacks or to curtail attacks on the LOC or from across the border near Jammu. Moreover, Pakistan's long-standing obsession to play a dominant role in the future dispensation of Afghanistan has frustrated India's efforts to find a role in the future of that war-torn country, despite Indian investments in Afghanistan ranging to about $2 billion. The US continues to view Pakistan as the key to any future settlement on Afghanistan, especially after 2014. And New Delhi has disappointed Afghan President Hamid Karzai by refusing to meet his wish list for military equipment and support, leaving the Afghan president with little option against Pakistan and its Taliban proxies, but to fall in line to the pressure of the US and Pakistan on any future security arrangements in Afghanistan, a country that could witness considerable Indo-Pak strategic rivalry in the future. With many powers vying for strategic space in Afghanistan, such as Russia, China, and Iran, apart from the United States and Pakistan, what role do you think India could play in the future dispensation of Afghanistan?
Absolutely, and I think this is going to be the biggest challenge for us. By the end of 2014, the Americans will most probably be out. They won't be in a combat role anymore. I think we should be clear on two things. I think one, India is not in a position to replace the United States. So we don't have the resources or the capacity to do that. Second, I think we also must not see ourselves in competition with Pakistan, because geography gives Pakistan a very historic advantage, a specific advantage there, and the ethnic population mix of the Pashtuns across the Durand line also gives advantage to Pakistan. So our strategy should be to build a coalition with whoever forces around in the region who are willing to fight extremism and terrorism. And second aspect of that strategy must be how do we reach out to all the groups inside Afghanistan, both the government and probably even the Taliban. We must find a way to start talking to them and to see our reach and our influence is not limited to one side.
With India likely to have an ineffective military presence in Afghanistan, will Pakistan get the upper hand in the region by re energizing the activities of the Pakistan Army and its terror proxies in Afghanistan?
We must certainly assume that, because Pakistan has huge stakes there. They've invested so much of bad money in it, and they're going to throw some more good money after the bad money. So I think there's nothing to suggest that Pakistan Army has learned any lessons from the last 30 years. So the challenge for us is how do we create a countervailing coalition to potential Pakistani overreach in Afghanistan. Internally, any Pakistani move into Afghanistan will face some resistance from some groups. We got to work with them. And we must also work with Iran, Russia, and other countries who have a big stake in preventing Taliban from falling into the hands of Pakistan and religious extremism.
With India's attention focused on Pakistan, other countries in the neighborhood stand to be neglected in a year that could prove to be decisive for India's foreign policy goals in the future. And even though Sheikh Hasina's government in Bangladesh was keen to further cement ties with New Delhi, her expectations of a favorable settlement to the Teesta water dispute and the land boundary agreement with India was scuttled by Bengal's politicians, leaving Dr. Manmohan Singh's government little room to maneuver on bilateral ties with Dhaka due to domestic compulsions. In fact, similar pressure of political parties from South India had led the Prime Minister to call off his visit to Sri Lanka for the Chogam summit. This clearly peeved Colombo, that saw India spoiling its coming out party, and the hope of New Delhi exercising greater leverage over Sri Lanka on the resettlement of the war-torn Tamil region was lost. The Chogam debacle also cost India a chance to emerge as a leader of the 54-nation Commonwealth grouping and further provided a strategic opening to the Chinese waiting in the wings to increase their leverage in Sri Lanka. Beijing has already made investments in the island nation, like developing the strategic Hambantota port to win over Colombo. The Chinese shadow south of India was not limited to Sri Lanka, but was visible in the Maldives also. The island nation elected a government not necessarily inclined towards New Delhi, as has also been the case with Nepal, where China has stepped up its efforts to wean Kathmandu away from India's long-standing influence in that Himalayan nation. Clearly, India must recalibrate and step up its diplomatic initiatives on multiple fronts in its neighborhood if New Delhi hopes to enjoy anything close to the influence India has previously wielded in the region. With elections and a change of government imminent in New Delhi, how much can India hope to retrieve from all that it has lost in the diplomatic leverage that it traditionally enjoyed with its neighbors?
I think we've lost a lot of ground. I think this government did so much work with Bangladesh in transforming the relationship. But when it came to the closure, I think the government yielded to domestic pressures and did not move forward, whether it is on the land boundary agreement or the Teesta water settlements. With Sri Lanka, similarly, we've lost ground. I don't see much progress in the next 6 months because the government is going to be in a lame duck mode. And I think the political convulsions at home are going to preoccupy us. But the rest of the world is not going to wait. So I think it is really up to the next government to think creatively to be able to recover the lost ground. There again, I think there are problems. Look at the BJP's opposition to the land boundary agreement. They're playing the same game, appeasing regional constituencies rather than thinking of the national interests. So we have a deeper crisis at home, the inability of our political class to see what's happening in a neighborhood and to put up a united front to deal with the extraordinary convulsions that are going on, for example, in Bangladesh today, and in Nepal, you look all across the region, that I think we need a new consensus and a new commitment to ensure that India remains the primary force in the subcontinent.
And which of the neighboring countries potentially offers the maximum benefits for India in terms of diplomatic ties in the near future, and why?
No, I think it's Bangladesh. I think purely in terms of its size, it's one of the largest countries. It's been a democracy. And here is a prime minister who's fighting extremism, who is trying to secure the nation's history. But I think we've already let them down quite a bit. But I think in the next few months, as the fight between the competing forces comes to a head, we might see it this week as well in the elections that are unfolding. I think we need to engage a lot more with Bangladesh. We need to devote a lot more attention, because a successful relationship with Bangladesh will remove some of the burdens we've inherited from the partition of the subcontinent.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rajamohan. It is clear that domestic compulsions and the absence of a consistent foreign policy has led to India losing considerable influence in the international arena and in the neighborhood. And with an aggressive China prowling to undermine India and keeping it restricted to the region, it is high time officials in New Delhi understand the importance of a strong and independent foreign policy to achieve India's global ambitions in 2014. That's all in this week's episode of Latitude. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye and thank you.